It's great to be here with you today. I can't even believe we're already almost through September already. It's just, I feel like I blink and a month has gone past. But we're going to go ahead and get started today. And really what the topic that we're talking about is about building our capacity as instructional leaders who are engaging in observation and feedback. That's one of our primary tasks as instructional leaders. And so we're going to really dive into that topic today over the next 60 minutes, and we're going to talk a little bit about what does that exactly look like and sound like. I want you to take a look at this quote for me for just a moment. And I want you to really consider what this quote means for you as instructional leaders in your buildings. You know, I have the words "my why" written up here because my why as an instructional leader in the work that I do is really to support leaders, building leaders, school leaders, to create environments where the teachers, the adults in the building, all of the adults, not just the students, but all of the adults really are learners and view themselves as learners themselves. I like to say this, you know, when I walk into schools, one of the things that I like to do is I like to go to the students in the building, whether these are kid students or adult students. And I like to walk in and I like to ask them, who are the learners in this building? And it's always fascinating to me to hear what they have to say. Do they point to the teachers? Do they point to even the administrators, leadership of the program? Do they point to those folks and say they're learners too? Because ultimately, that's the type of environment that we want to create, an environment where everyone, no matter what your role is, everyone is a learner. Everyone's trying to create and to change and to improve and to grow themselves as professionals. And that's a huge piece to this work. It's a huge cultural shift that we're making. So in order to make that shift, we have to start with our why. Or what is our why? Now, what I will be doing at the end of this video, this little webinar, is we will be sending out a link for you to be able to watch a short video clip. And it's really talks about understanding our why we do what we do. But in the meantime, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the clip, and then you'll have to watch it for yourself. But there's a comedian named Michael Jr., and Michael Jr. travels around the country, and he talks to audiences about this sort of thing, about developing yourself as a professional, about really making sure that we're walking in our purpose, in the work that we're intended to do, and we're getting the most out of what we do. And one time, Michael Jr. was standing in an auditorium, and he points to a guy in the front row and says, "Sir, tell me what it is that you do." And the man says, "Well, I'm a music teacher, teach music." And he said, "Oh, that's great. Why don't you go ahead and sing a couple bars of Amazing Grace for me?" So you'll see in this video, but this gentleman that you see on the screen in front of you, he goes ahead and he sings Amazing Grace. He belts out a few little bars, and everyone claps, and it's great. Then Michael Jr. says this. He says, "Okay, that was great." He goes, "But now I want you to sing Amazing Grace again." And he said, "I'd like you to sing Amazing Grace again, but this time I'm going to give you some context to it." He said, "You grew up in a really rough childhood. You were shot as a kid and survived. Your uncle just got out of prison." He said, "You've had a rough life, but yet you've managed to make it to where you are today. I want you to sing Amazing Grace again for me." And this gentleman that you see on the screen, he belted out Amazing Grace in such a unique and different way. It had everyone in the audience just in awe. And you know, Michael Jr. went on to say this at the end of this gentleman singing. He said, "You know, when you know your why you do what you do, your what has more impact because you're walking in and toward your purpose." I want you to read that quote again for just a minute and consider what that means. Because in our work as leaders and directors of programs, we can get so caught up sometimes in going through the motions and doing what it is that we need to do, particularly when it comes to observation and feedback. Okay, we know this is a part of our jobs. We're being required to go into classrooms and leave feedback, but oftentimes we're doing it because we have to do it. We understand the what, but we don't oftentimes understand the why behind it, why this is so important in our work as directors. Why do we have to do this? And so today, that's really what we're going to move into. I want to explain the why. I want to make sure we truly connect and understand why it is that observation and feedback is so critical and essential to our roles as leaders in our programs. So, all that being said, we're going to move forward here a little bit further. I want you to ask you this question. I'd like you to consider this for a minute. What is your organizational why? If I were to walk into your buildings, to speak to the teachers in your program, and I were to ask some of these questions that you see on the screen, would they be able to answer those questions? Do they have a true understanding of the why that's behind your program? Do they have a true understanding of the why behind observation and feedback? Because, you know, more often than not, when I talk with teachers about the administration, the leadership coming in and observing and providing feedback, and I say, talk to me about why that's important. How does this connect with the work that you do each and every day? How does this connect to the vision of your program? I don't oftentimes hear answers that make the connections. So as we start with that why, and I ask you to understand the why of observation and feedback, a second piece to all of this work is to make sure that our teachers, the staff within our buildings, and yes, even the students in our programs, they understand the why behind observation and feedback. And that's a huge piece to our communication and communicating expectations around that. You know, I could hand you a protocol and talk to you about the steps that you take as you walk into a room and what to look for and how to leave your specific feedback. And you could go and engage in that work. But if everyone, every entity involved in that piece does not understand why, how does this connect to what I do? It'll fall short of our goal and our purpose. So as we think about the why behind observation and feedback, I throw this picture up here. Remember these old things where you'd put the colored piece of paper over something and out would pop the message in front of us? That's ultimately what I want to do today in this short little bit of time that we have together. I want to make clear this whole concept of observation and feedback. Now, you might have it clear in your minds already, but what I also want to do is I also want to give you some great language, some verbiage that you can use as you go back to your programs and speak with teachers, and give you some ideas of how you can speak clearly and help bring that clarity, the why, to observation and feedback to your teachers and help them understand it as well. That's a big piece to our work. So in order to start down this path in the short amount of time that we have, I'm going to back up for just a little bit and make sure that we all start with the same essential understanding. Observation and feedback really stems and connects right back to the teacher in the classroom. So when we think about the teacher, I want to share with you this. Think about the best teacher that you've ever seen in action. What is it that sets them apart from their peers? Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to shift from cultures of mediocrity toward cultures of excellence. And in order to shift teachers from moving from mediocrity to excellence, we have to be able to recognize the characteristics that really set the excellent apart from their peers. And if I were to ask you to share with me right now, in fact, I will do that. Go ahead. If you can speak, that's great. If not, if you want to put it into comments, what is it that sets the excellent teachers apart from their peers? Go ahead and share with me for just a moment. What have we got? You can type it into the comments section. You can go ahead and speak out to me. They embrace growth mindset. Yes, Susan, absolutely.
I agree. They're lifelong learners. They're not afraid to not afraid to take risks and feel comfortable enough to take those risks.
Excellent. And was that Bernice?
Yes.
Excellent. Absolutely. They're not afraid to take risks. And that all stems back to, okay, then how can we create an environment within our programs? Deb, you say they care about their students. Absolutely. So how do we create this culture of reflective practice within our buildings where everyone feels that it's a safe enough environment? They're encouraged to take those risks, to try new things, to talk about the work that they do with their students. You know, at the end of the day, when we stop and think about the difference between excellence and mediocrity, it really all stems back to how one thinks about what they do. And that really then connects back to the work of John Dewey. You know, John Dewey talked a lot about how we think drives what we do. And John Dewey, Donald Shawn, there's a number of philosophers and researchers that have all pointed and spoken to this concept that how you think is ultimately what drives what you do. And that then stems back to reflective practice. So I want you to consider this flow chart that I've put in front of you for just a moment. You know, we have student learning at the end of it because that's ultimately what we're about. We want our students to grow and to learn and to develop. So what leads to student learning? Well, we know students learn based upon what they do. And what students do is a direct result of what teachers do, how teachers plan, how teachers interact with the students, the relationships that they build, all of those pieces, how they plan, the relationships that they build, how they think when they engage in that lesson as they look for learning opportunities, the questions that they ask, the way that they choose to engage their students, how they utilize assessment, all of that funnels into those teacher actions. And you know, typically in programs, we stop there. And as leaders, we tend to focus on those teacher actions. It's not unlike an iceberg floating around in the ocean. We come along as an instructional leader, we pop into a classroom and we look to see what's going on, and we see what we call the observables, the pieces that are above the surface. And we tend to look at those teacher actions and go, the teacher's doing this, I want them to do this. The students are doing this, well, I think you should try this next time. And we tend to leave feedback in that manner. What we don't oftentimes recognize or stop to think about is that teacher actions are a direct result of how a teacher thinks, teacher reflection. And you know, in the work that Pete Hall and I have done over the past 15 years and all of our research and work around teacher reflection, we've come to really put together what we call our reflective cycle. And this reflective cycle is this predictable pattern of thinking that we have found through our research that excellent teachers have cultivated and refined. This isn't something that someone wakes up and is born with. I mean, we definitely have teachers that just seem to inherently have a gift for teaching. And then we meet others that we say, you know, sometimes they struggle in terms of teaching adults and understanding adults, and they seem to struggle a little bit more. Well, really, at the end of the day, the difference is how one thinks. So in front of you, you see the reflective cycle, and that reflective cycle is that predictable pattern of thinking that our excellent teachers engage in. And not only do they engage in it, but they engage in it on a regular, frequent basis. It's something that happens in real time over and over and over again. They don't just funnel through this cycle of thinking at the beginning of a year and all the way through the end of their year. This is something that is cultivated and refined with work and through work. Because as we begin to refine how we think, we end up automatically refining what we do in a classroom. We end up sharing and articulating our thinking in a way that our students pick up on, and then they begin to refine how they think as students. And it begins to trickle all the way down. So take a look at this reflective cycle. Some of you may have seen this before, but it's one of those things that we as leaders, if we are to engage in proper observation and feedback, we want to use this reflective cycle as the filter through which we observe and the filter through which we leave our feedback. Because as you and I both know now, that if we walk into a classroom and we see all of these observables, oftentimes our first question is, where do I start? How much feedback do I leave this person without ripping them to shreds, without leaving them in, crying and in tears, or maybe, what amount of feedback do I leave that's positive as opposed to what amount of feedback do I leave that might be considered negative? Where's that fine line? Those are all questions that we tend to ask and think as folks that are engaged in observation and feedback. The power and the tool that you see in front of you, however, pushes all that aside, because what we end up focusing on is we leave feedback around how we think instead of what we see being done. So this is called the reflective cycle. Yes, Karen, absolutely. We call this the reflective cycle. And I'll explain it a little bit further and then ask you for some feedback around this. But I'd like you to consider this. We start in the upper right-hand quadrant. And in that quadrant, we start with this awareness, because we can't reflect upon something unless we have an awareness of it. So we look first as we're walking into a classroom and we're watching this, class unfold. We're looking and asking ourselves, how aware is this teacher of the realities in their classroom? How aware are they of their students' learning needs? How aware are they of the content that they're teaching? How it connects? Are they aware of misconceptions? How this content connects to where they're leading to, or of a previous class or a future class? How aware are they of their content? And then finally, how aware is this teacher of pedagogical practices, of best practices in learning? How aware are they of the ability to engage their students as adult learners? From there, then we look to ask ourselves the next, it's kind of like a click of the brain. How intentionally is this teacher then acting upon their level of awareness? So they might have a very minor level of awareness about their adult learners, but are they acting with intentionality? Are they able to, do they know why they're doing what they're doing in the classroom? If I were to ask them, what led you to engage your adult learners in the way that you did today? Would they be able to answer that question and directly connect it back to the teacher's awareness of their learners? So that then shifts us into that intentionality of actions. Now from there, the next click of the brain, if you were to consider your most excellent teacher, they have a deep awareness. They connect what they do. They're thinking with intentionality. They're very deliberate and strategic in what they do. And from there, the next questions that you can see them asking inside their minds is this working? Is this not working? How do I know? So they have a deep level of an ability to be able to accurately assess in the moment. They don't need a test to be able to, and to have to grade a test to be able to tell them if their students learned something or not. They're in the middle of that lesson reading student faces. They're collecting exit tickets. They are giving tasks or formative assessments. They're throwing formative assessments out there in real time to be able to gauge the learning of their students in that moment. They're eliciting feedback from their adult learners. And then from there, that kind of turns them right into that ability to adjust their actions. And as an observer, I'm now watching. Are they being responsive? The lesson is kind of tanking. Do they have the ability to be able to make those snap decisions in that moment and pull the students back, to deviate from a lesson plan if it's not going well, and to regroup everybody and start again? Those are the things that I am looking for as an observer who's required to give feedback. Because when I look at it through this lens, I'm then able to give the right feedback that I need to provide to the teacher. I'm going to pause here because I want to hear from you. I would love to hear, what ahas do you have? How is this connecting? Do you have any questions? How does this connect to the work that you're doing right now as an observer who has to give feedback? Talk with me just a little bit. I would love to hear directly from you, thoughts that you're having. Again, feel free to speak out or provide a comment, type it on in, but I'd love to hear from each of you. Just one short aha or thought that this brings to the table. If you've been a person who has already been through one of my former sessions and this is kind of old news to you, how have you seen this connect? Is this, as you've gone back and engaged in this work, how does this connect with what you're doing right now? I want to hear from you. I I know you've got great thoughts.
Alisa, this is Leslie. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Leslie.
Hi. I'm new to this whole evaluative process in that I took over our program in the spring, and so we haven't really started doing observations yet this fall. And I guess what I'm kind of stuck on right here is how do we get the staff to be open to that mindset? My intention is to tell them that, you know, we are doing observations and evaluations because it's a requirement, and that my role is to support them to become better teachers. But I'm not sure how receptive they're going to be to that.
And Leslie, that's a great question, very articulate, because so many folks have that same question as we start. How do we get going in this work? And I heard another person agree with you. So that's a tough thing. And that's exactly where I want to head with the rest of this webinar actually this morning. But I'll start with this. A lot of this will come down in terms of them being open and receptive. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not like you're going to say the right magic words and everyone's going to go, oh, we feel so safe with you walking in our rooms and watching what we do and not judging us, you know? So a lot of this work, I will tell you right now, is going to stem from how you choose to communicate, how you choose to lay and roll this whole thing out. And that's a crucial piece to this work, is setting the expectations, talking about it. And I'm going to actually give you a lot of examples of what this sounds like and what it could look like here in a few more minutes. But I will share this. This tool that you see in front of you, if you need a hard copy, we can absolutely get you one. But this is a tool that you want to share with everyone. Because what you want to say is this is our goal. I have a reflective cycle tool. And what this is instead of really focusing on what you do, I want to refine how you think about what you do. I want to ask you questions that drive it how you think. And you know, when you have someone standing in front of you, your director standing in front of you, talking to you about creating this new culture within the building, how this is new for you as a director, it's new for them. We're going to begin to walk down a new path together. But instead of coming in and looking at what you do each and every day, what you want to hone in on and what you're going to really begin to value is how everyone thinks, because there's so much thinking that goes on behind the scenes before you come to the table and deliver a lesson, that I really want to value and validate the thinking that goes on behind the scenes that leads into this lesson. And so as a result, staff, I'm going to be asking you questions that really drive and ask about the thinking that you engage in, because I want to validate your level of expertise that you bring to the table. So you're not going to find that I walk into your classrooms and I begin to go, oh, you weren't doing this, you weren't doing that. No, I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to ask you to talk more with me about how you think about what you do. You know, when as a staff member, if a director were to say that to me, that's going to dispel a certain level of fears for me. I'm going to go, oh, okay, this person is really valuing me and what I come to bring to the table. And they're going to be looking less at what I do, if it's perfect, and they're going to really be valuing me as an expert. So we'll get into a little bit of that, but this is a great place to start, to pass out this tool and to say, hey, this is really the tool that I'm going to use, because all of you think through this cycle yourselves. So I'm going to ask you questions that drive at your thinking, not just your doing. That's the first place.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Good. You know, and here's my next slide. This is our goal. Our goal as leaders, and this is what I will ask you even to share with your staff. Your goal is to develop thinking around practice, because how we think drives what we do. And so these right here, this is exactly what I would share. And I'm going to come to Bernice's comment in just a second. This is exactly what I would share with my staff. I would say this, you know, my goal as a leader is to deepen your thinking about your practice, because if I can refine how you think about what you do, if I can facilitate conversation amongst you where you talk about how you think about what you do, we're only going to strengthen our entire program. This isn't about judgment. This isn't about who's good or who's bad or anything like that. This is about the fact that we all want to come together and we want to refine how we all think about what we do and about classroom practice. That's ultimately what happens. And Bernice made a great comment, and Kate, maybe you can share with me how I am struggling to pull up her comment. It disappeared off my screen. Oh, here, wait. I think I just got it. There we go. Bernice said this. Okay. I've got it. I talked briefly with staff regarding the use of multiple forms of formative assessments, making sure that they are checking in and checking understanding. Very brief to adapt. Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. Because ultimately, we want to connect observation and feedback directly to their own professional development. And this concept that we want teachers to feel the empowered and to feel their own ownership of professional development. Because ultimately, professional development resides within them. And this is something also that you might want to share with everyone. You might want to share this and say, you know, I want to empower you to take charge of your own professional growth. And so I will provide opportunities. I will give you feedback, but that's not going to make you develop as a professional. You're in charge of your own professional growth. Every day that you stand in front of your class, you'll find opportunities to develop and grow yourself as a professional. But the ownership at the end of the day resides in you. I will give you feedback. I want to ask you questions to get your mind thinking and growing. I want you to ask me great questions. I want you to ask each other great questions, because what we want to do is create an environment where everyone is pursuing their own professional growth themselves. That's ultimately what we want to get to. Okay, we're going to move on here. I shared, I was in town about a month ago, and I shared that ASCD has a leadership framework. And out of that leadership framework, they really hone in on the principle as an instructional leader. And that's really where our work, our why comes from. That we work as visionaries. We're create a vision for our programs, and part of that vision is this idea of creating a culture of reflective practice within our programs. We also are going to work as instructional leaders to ask those right questions. We want to engage the community in this work, and then we also want to model what it is like to be a learner and a collaborator ourselves, because when we model that, then everyone else sees that it's a safe environment to be able to engage in that work. So let's hone in on this idea of being an instructional leader. There's really 4 parts to instructional leadership. 1, it's building the collective capacity of our staff through a professional learning community. And a professional learning community is nothing more than adults that come together and learn from one another. That's really all that it is. And we want to create environments within our programs that can do that. That's part of our work as instructional leaders. The second piece to that is to build the capacity through our work as supervisors, right? Where we come in and we provide some differentiated supervision and coaching, feedback and evaluation. And that's where observation and feedback falls under. The third piece to our work as instructional leaders is really making sure that our curriculum and our best practices all align to the formative assessment pieces. We are looking for that alignment piece, and that's part of our work as instructional leaders. And then finally, the last but not least is really the collection of data, right? Using data to inform our work as instructional leaders. Now, I share this framework with you so that we can kind of envision where observation and feedback falls. Observation and feedback really falls under that piece of going in and providing feedback and evaluation. That's really where that observation and feedback does fall. So all that being said, feedback is absolutely essential to that observation process, right? Because I like to think of it this way. If you think about the grid, the electrical grid of an entire city, you have electricity running everywhere. It keeps the city afloat, keeps the businesses going, right? Feedback is like the electricity that keeps everything connected and keeps everything going. And that really falls upon our shoulders to keep that going. So when we think about effective feedback, what that looks like and sounds like, for so many people, we have this notion of, okay, I've got to leave positive, and maybe I'll leave a couple of constructive ideas that they can go forward and do. We kind of tend to frame things in that way. I want to shift our notion. of what effective feedback really looks like. And so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you right now just to think about an example of when feedback really didn't go as planned. Maybe it was feedback given to you that left you with a sour taste in your mouth, or a time when you tried to give feedback to somebody and it just kind of blew up in your face. What's characteristics of that feedback? What happened when that feedback went awry? What made that feedback gave it the bad taste that it was, and what led it to be kind of a negative piece? Go ahead and share with me, again, through notes or speaking out. Teacher felt like it was a personal attack on her. Yes, Deb, absolutely. And I will tell you right now, you just honed in on really the number one reason when that feedback goes awry. When observation and feedback ends up just completely flipping and falling on its head and really impacts the culture. I'm looking at what Bernice had to say, being talked down to. Yes, yes. And Mary, based on opinion, not on evidence. Absolutely. All of those, that what you're sharing here is when our feedback ends up, yes, right here, Leslie, they heard only negative, not positive. And yes, Karen, oftentimes we have the best of intentions. We go to leave it, and then all of a sudden someone takes it the wrong way, and somehow it becomes this personal attack on them. Absolutely, absolutely. Now I want you to flip hats now for just a minute. Think of an example of feedback that fed, that was positive, that fed forward, that created, was received in a good way. Give me an example. What's a characteristic of that kind of feedback? You know, I always find it interesting that it takes folks a little bit longer to think of that kind of feedback than the opposite, because we have so many examples of yes, I can. Go right ahead.
Hi, this is Karen Oakley. I was just going to speak instead of write a long thing. I
Sure.
think one of the workshops that we had where we talked about differentiating feedback, I think that made a big impression on me, because I think it's not even so much what you say or how you say it. It's like, is the teacher at a place where that's what they're ready to hear? And the same feedback to two different teachers can have, in one case, go awry, and the other be very nourishing. So I think one of the big things is trying to first figure out where the teacher is at. That's it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great point, Karen, as Leslie even said here too. Feedback is less about us. It's more about the receiver. And is the receiver ready to hear it? Is the receiver in a place? Is it the right language for the receiver to hear? So I want you to do me a favor. I'm going to go back to that reflective cycle, and I want you to look at this again for just a moment. And I'd like you to consider, oops, I guess it was back a little further than I thought. My apologies. I want you to consider a teacher. You've walked into her classroom. Here we are. Oops, went too far. She has a minimal awareness of her students, really is just going through the motions of teaching, right? Whether she's been teaching for a while or she's new to adult education, whatever it might be. But she's going through the motions. She's focused on her lessons every day. She's got, her lessons in front of her, and this is her focus of what I need to get through. And you walk in and you happen to observe and see her students not necessarily engaged. The teacher is doing all the talking, all the thinking, all of the learning herself and modeling it for her students, but her students are bored to tears and not necessarily engaged. Now you leave feedback with that teacher and say, how did your lesson go today? Consider the response the teacher might give you. Teacher might go, well, I think it went well. I got through my lesson really well, right? I did it. I did everything, got through it all. I collected the homework. I'll know more tonight how the students did when I correct their homework, right? Now, if I, as a director observer in that classroom, and I'm engaging with that teacher, if I have this chart in front of me and I'm already thinking about how is this teacher thinking? Where is their level of awareness? I begin to ask her about an assessment question, whether or not, if you look at that third quadrant, if I'm asking her a question out of that third quadrant, when she really hasn't developed in the first quadrant yet, a deep level of awareness, she's going to hear my questioning of how'd your lesson go today as your lesson sucked, your lesson didn't go well, right? She might hear something negative and take it as a personal attack because her level of awareness has not yet been developed about what to look for and what to see in the classroom. So it's so easy to be able to kind of cross wires when it comes to feedback sometimes. What we have to be able to understand most importantly is, how is the teacher thinking? Do they have a deep level of awareness? Do I need to speak to the first quadrant before I even jump to any of the other quadrants? Bernice, you wrote, know your audience. In a district meeting the other day, we talked about learning plan as opposed to a lesson plan. Oh, I love that. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's less about going through the motions. It's about understanding where the other person really is. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward in my slides back to where I was. But I wanted to plant that seed of understanding that we have to differentiate our feedback, just like we ask our teachers to differentiate the work that they do and to get to know their students as individuals too. You know, John Hattie, I'm going to gloss over this pretty quickly. John Hattie is a researcher. He's collected, but he's a researcher that's slightly different than the normal crowd. He's got several books out, but these are two of them called Visible Learning. And what he's done is he's done a meta-analysis of what positive feedback looks like and its impact that it can have on learning and on professional development of teachers. The book that you see in front of you is over 800 meta-analyses. Now it's up to over 1,200, but he's collected research, studies that have been done. He vets them and then puts them all together. And what he has created is this that you see in front of you. The idea behind this is that there's a scale and there's a rating. And if anything is typical learning occurs at a 0.4, I won't go into too much detail here because of our time, but when feedback is given in the right way and utilized in a context where the teachers understand the purpose and the why behind feedback, it can have a 0.74 impact. 0.74, which if you take a look at the hinge point here, the hinge point is 0.4. 0.74 is in that zone of desired effects. You know, Hattie goes on and has this to say, that when we as instructional leaders promote and participate in teacher learning, you can have a 0.9 effect on the school environment. And again, there's that 0.74 with feedback to teachers. So feedback is essential. The right kind of feedback is absolutely crucial. And so I'm going to give you a quick example of this. You know, our transformational feedback doesn't have to be something that's super long, super big. Transformational feedback also isn't cookie cutter. It's not 3 positives and 1 suggestion or negative. It doesn't follow to a certain protocol and a certain plan, because guess what? The people that we're working with are human beings. They're unique and different, and they think differently. So we have to start by identifying, how is this teacher thinking? Where's the level of depth when it comes to how they think about what they do? And I'm going to speak my feedback to how they think. And when I do that, it's very targeted, very specific, but yet it'll have the greatest amount of impact. That's exactly what it will do. So ultimately, when we walk into a classroom and we're watching a lesson unfold, we have to really start by asking ourselves the questions of, how does this teacher think? What is it like? What does it sound like? I shared a video, and I'm going to share the link with you at the end of this webinar. You'll get it emailed to you. It's on YouTube, but it's a video about a gorilla. And what they do is they ask you to observe. There's a group of people standing in front of a curtain, and they're passing balls. They're bouncing these basketballs back and forth. And they ask you to watch, to notice how many times the ball gets passed between players. So you're so busy counting that you don't even realize sometimes that there is a gorilla that actually walks through the crowd. And I share that with you now. You'll get to watch the video later. But the connection that this can be is this. So often we walk into a classroom and we're so caught up in what we see on the surface that we forget to look for what's behind what we see. We forget sometimes to recognize, how is the teacher thinking right now that leads her or him to create the lesson, to engage the students in the way that they are. When we put that filter over our eyes, we automatically begin to ask different questions. We begin to see different things. And you know what ends up happening is when we begin to engage in conversation with that teacher or leave them feedback, it sounds so unique and so different. I have a tool that I'm not going to have time to share with you today, but it's called the Continuum of Self-Reflection, and it connects directly to this reflective cycle. What ends up happening is this tool that will be shared at the end of this webinar, it helps us begin to identify, where is this teacher in their thinking? Are they unaware? Are they in that first quadrant where they're really unaware of the realities in their classroom? And if they are unaware, then what this tool will do, it'll actually give you the right feedback prompts. It kind of gives you examples of, what do you say to a teacher who's struggling in their awareness? They don't have a deep level of awareness. What type of feedback speaks their language? For teachers that might have a level of awareness but are struggling with being intentional in their actions, we put them in what we call the conscious stage. And in that conscious stage, we have a specific set of feedback prompts that we, and in terms of observation and feedback, of things that we need to look for and the type of feedback prompts we need to provide them. And this tool will give those prompts to you. You can see our third quadrant, if they are stuck in this ability to assess, they're going through the motions, they're trying to be very intentional, but they're struggling with really recognizing, is this working, is this not working, and how do I know? To analyze the impact of their actions, then we put them in the action stage. And then finally, our fourth quadrant is connected to the refinement stage. So that tool will be something that we will share with you at the end of this webinar as well, because they connect very deeply. Ultimately, I come back to this. We want to create environments where people change themselves, where we're not doing the work for them. Okay, so I'm going to skip just because of time. I'm going to kind of move us past this for just a minute. Our feedback that we give isn't going to transform people overnight, all of a sudden. Sometimes they'll have aha moments. Other times, it's like we're planting seeds in their mind. Have you considered this? Or talk to me about your thinking when you planned your lesson today. What were you thinking about when it came to this specific group of students that you have in this class? Because I noticed that they're struggling with their engagement. Talk to me about their thinking. When I frame my feedback in that way, I'm planting seeds of thought in their mind. So it's not an attack. I'm actually respectful in my feedback, and I'm respecting them as an educator to what they bring to the table, and I'm engaging them in a different type of discussion that has nothing to do with right or wrong or good or bad. So I'm going to give you now, like I mentioned before, some very tangible things. I want to end our webinar today with some very strong tangibles that you can take back and roll with it, okay? If you're in a classroom, you're at a loss of a place to start, here's some prompts that you can always use. It appeared that the objective of your lesson today was XYZ, right? So I'm always watching for an objective of a lesson when I'm in a room, right? Because that tells me about the teacher's thinking. The teacher is thinking, and they should come into this whole lesson with an objective in their mind, or maybe they don't sometimes. And the lesson is over here, but I'm confused about what was the overall objective today. So an objective is a direct connection to that teacher's thinking before they engaged in the lesson, during as they engaged in the lesson, and then really afterwards they're going to connect back. So if we can keep always, if we're ever at a loss of a place to start, if we can keep the emphasis on the objective, that's a powerful place. So if I frame it as, it appeared the objective today was XYZ, tell me more about ABC. Tell me more about the activity that you used, because oftentimes maybe the activity doesn't match the objective, or the feedback that the adult learners are giving doesn't connect, they're not making and meeting the objective. I can ask the teacher to tell me more. Or I noticed that your students are struggling to meet the objective. Talk to me more about what you noticed in the middle of the lesson too. I'm always eliciting the teacher's thoughts, because ultimately that type of feedback plants seeds. It's not threatening. It values them as professionals, and that begins to shift this whole culture that we're trying to create in our buildings. Keep the focus on that student learning. Some more things. When you're going to frame your positives, right? When you're going to frame your positives, here's some examples. Be as specific as possible. When you did X, Y, Z, A, B, C happened. What a strategic or intentional way to engage your students today. Nice job. Do you see how what I'm doing there with that feedback? I'm planting seeds. I'm bringing something to a teacher's attention that maybe they weren't trying to be intentional or strategic. Something just happened. But now that I've pointed it out, they're going to engage in that even more. They're going to start noticing exactly what you just pointed out. So use your positives as ways to plant seeds. There's another one. It's evident that your planning led to increased student engagement. Boy, your students have made a lot of progress. You're making the connections for them, whether they saw it or not. And then finally, I saw you make a snap decision today to change your lesson midstream when your students were confused. This shows that you have a deep level of awareness and you're connected to student learning in real time. By simply being specific in that manner, using even these three things over and over again, if these are your go-to pieces, use these over and over again. You will begin to plant those seeds and really build a vision for good teaching in a classroom. Here's some other pieces. Now, this is what it looks like, and I'm going to go back to what we talked about a little bit ago of how do you state your expectations at the beginning of the year in a positive way. So here's some examples. If I were your director and I'm speaking to you as my staff, this would be something that it sounds like. You know, this year, expect my feedback to be framed around your thinking. I'm going to ask you lots of questions about the thinking that you do before your lesson, during your lesson, and after your lesson, because I really want to hear more from you. I don't just want to walk into your rooms and leave you feedback on the superficial things that sometimes I see, because you and I both know that I can walk in for 5 minutes and see something and walk out and not fully understand all the stuff that went into that lesson beforehand. So I really want to know more about your thinking throughout your teaching. So expect a lot of feedback around that today. The second thing I might say is expect me to be really specific in my questioning. I'm going to be direct sometime in my questioning, and I'm going to ask you to share with me because I want to get to know what's happening inside your brains as you teach. You are incredible experts when it comes to your content, when it comes to your adult learners in your classroom and getting to know them. I don't have the opportunity to get inside your brains. So I'm going to be asking you lots of very direct questions that really get into your brain to find out and know more. Expect me to ask lots of questions. Expect me to ask you to try something new and then tell me what you notice in your classroom and come back to me about whether it worked and whether it didn't work and you know why. I'm going to ask you to try some new things for the sake of trying something new. Expect me to ask you to talk to your peers about your thinking. Expect me, and this is a big one, expect me to celebrate any ahas or yikes in our monthly staff meetings. And that's a powerful thing. I'm going to leave you with this idea here today, and then I'll take some questions here. Celebrations in staff meetings can be absolutely one of the best things you can do to get this ball rolling in a positive way. And so what it looks like and sounds like is this. The beginning of my staff meeting, I might say, you know, today we're going to start new celebrations. We're not just going to celebrate birthdays and whatnot. I want to celebrate ahas you've had in the past month. So I'm going to open up the floor and I'd like folks to share what ahas have you had? How have you grown and developed yourself as a professional this past month? Let's share some ahas. Now, your first staff meeting, you might have to go to folks in advance and say, would you share that to the staff? You might have to plant some seeds to get folks to start this off. But I will tell you, once you do this on a regular basis, it will become such a powerful thing because guess what you've just done? You've opened up the door to have everybody's brains opened up, and I'm now sharing my aha that I had this week, and everyone else is listening. And we all know what happens when someone shares an aha. It gives me that aha, or it gives me different lenses. So now when I walk back in my room, I'm thinking about your aha, and I see my students, my learners from a slightly different perspective. It can be a powerful thing. So that's another tool that you can put in your bag of tricks to get this ball rolling around really what observation is and feedback is all about. Observation and feedback should be directly connected to professional development. Now, how often should you conduct walkthroughs? I will say this is all, I would say start slowly, but then set the expectation with your staff. Expect me to walk through all of your rooms at least once a week. Now, I'm doing this to get you more comfortable with me, to get me more comfortable with you, your students more comfortable, and I will always just leave you a quick note and thank you. I'm not looking for good or bad. What I want to do is I want to develop an environment where we're all comfortable coming in and out of each other's rooms. Other questions. What's the best format for leaving feedback? Again, that might be something that you even ask teachers for their feedback. What works best for you in terms of feedback? Would you prefer verbal? Would you prefer an email? Do you want me to leave feedback right before I leave the classroom? What works best for you? That's again part of planting a seed of shifting the culture in your building. Do you need a one-on-one conversation each time? No, absolutely not. Again, it just depends on your teachers, but you don't need to sit down and leave feedback face-to-face every single time. Sometimes it is important, sometimes not. What if you see something odd that's not related to the teacher's focus during a walkthrough? You know, what do you do if you see something different? That might be a time where you say, hey, I would love to chat more with you about this. I want to hear more about your thinking to what's happening in your classroom that I happen to see today. Would you come chat with me? There's lots of different ways to do it. My point is this: be open with your teachers. Share with them your thoughts. Throw questions like these out to them at the beginning of the year and ask them for their feedback. What's going to work for you? Because ultimately, what I want to know from you as teachers is, how do you grow the best professionally? And how can I serve a role in your own professional learning? What does that look like and sound like? I want your feedback so that I can play that role for you. Okay, I've done enough talking and our hour is up. So what I'd love to do is open it up to questions. Any thoughts, questions you have? Yes, we can absolutely make these slides available for sure, Bernice. Karen asked, do you also recommend a longer or more in-depth observation feedback in addition to brief walkthroughs? Great question, Karen. Yes, absolutely. I would set up the expectation. Again, this is all dependent upon where your staff is. If they are going to be very gun shy with the thought of you coming into their classrooms, if this is a brand new thing, start slowly. Start with just popping through and leaving just a thanks so much for letting me come in sticky note on their desk. Let's really build that credibility and that rapport first. And then you're going to want to communicate, because we know communication is the best way to dispel fear. So communicate openly about, okay, it's been a couple of weeks. I've been in and out of all your rooms. I'm so excited to support your professional growth now. So now expect me to come in, expect me to stay a little bit longer. You know what I'd love to do is I would love to meet with each of you beforehand, and I would love to find out what you'd like me to specifically look for and give you feedback around. That's also another very safe way to get started with this process, is asking teachers to give you that feedback. What do you want me to give you feedback around? How can I best support your professional growth? That's another easy way to do it. Karen, sometimes I hear from teachers that a brief visit doesn't give the whole picture. Oh, absolutely. And that is something you want to make sure you communicate from the outset, that you recognize that. That's the number one thing teachers will say. Oh, they were in here and they left right before everything went great, We always want to share that from the get-go. I recognize I won't be able to see the whole thing. That is why I'm going to ask you to tell me, one, what to look for when I'm in your room, and two, that's why I'm going to ask you to talk to me about your thinking. It isn't just going to be around what I see in that moment. That's a brief snapshot, but there's so much more to it. You did so much more thinking beforehand that I want to find out about. So I'll be asking you questions about your thinking. And that tends to make everybody go, oh, okay. Good feedback. Any other questions? All right. Well, I'm here to support you. So please email me anytime with any questions, any thoughts, and we will go from here.